businessman. And he's been a dedicated public servant. But you've heard this old Irish thing. You can always tell an Irishman, but you can't tell them much. So how is it you keep somebody like that humble? You know what his answer is? He's got a wife and 4 daughters. Please welcome to Floyd County, John Delaney.
Thank you for your hospitality. We had a nice visit this morning at church. It was I really appreciate you inviting me to your nice parish there. I enjoyed it very much. It was a nice way to start the day with a little spiritual renewal. So thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you all for coming out. It's great for you to come out. And I don't know where Todd went. I wanted to thank you for coming. Thank you. Our leader. Everyone knows Todd Pritchard, obviously.
Yeah.
Just give him a round of applause. Well, happy St. Patrick's Day indeed to all of you. Is everyone having a good day? I see some nice green. My youngest daughter threw the green sweater and shirt in my bag when I was leaving. She always does a little last-minute packing for me, and I never know quite what I'm going to find in there, and she often writes a little note with it. But this time she took good care of me because she gave me something that I needed, which is some green to wear. So it's great to be with you. And St. Patrick's Day has always been a kind of a special day for me because my dad considered himself, he was a really proud Irishman, and he loved everything Irish. And this was kind of in many ways his favorite day of the year. He used to have a couple of cold ones, and it was a big day for him. So I always think of him on St. Patrick's Day. He passed away several years ago, but I'm actually driving his truck around Iowa. He was an electrician, and he always had a pickup truck. And so I've got his last pickup truck with me, and we drove it out to Iowa. When did we drive it out? Was it January? Yeah, January. And so that's my way of getting around here. Were you saying something, sir? Sorry, I thought you said something. St. Patrick's Day is kind of a good day for me. It always puts me in a good mood. It makes me think of my dad growing up, which was a big time in our household. So thank you for coming out. It's great to have this opportunity to introduce myself to you. I'm very different than the current occupant in the Oval Office. And I just don't mean the hair. But I have a plan. I've spent my whole life bringing people together, which I think is the most important thing for our country right now. And I promise to always tell you the truth. Which I think at a minimum, that's what you deserve from your president, don't you think?
Yeah.
An honest conversation about what's actually happening in the world. So let me tell you about myself. I've actually lived the American dream. And I really do believe in the life that I've lived. I grew up in North Jersey. As I said, the son of an electrician. Neither of my parents went to college. But my dad was in a union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Anyone have any affiliation with that great union? That union was terrific to me growing up. It created a good environment in our house. My dad got paid pretty well when he worked. We had health care, all that kind of stuff. When I went to college at Columbia University, that union actually gave me a scholarship. And I would have never been able to go to that school but for that union. And it's always been a great reminder to me that no one does it alone in the world. But for a bunch of electricians throwing some money into a hat every week, I wouldn't have had the opportunities I've had. After college at Columbia, I went down to Georgetown Law School, where the best thing happened to me that could have possibly happened, and that is I met my wife. She is from Idaho. Her dad was a potato farmer, and so the union electrician's son meets the potato farmer's daughter, only in America. And as Jim said, we've been blessed with 4 daughters, 26 to 11, our little tag-along Brits. My wife is one of the leading attorneys in the country that focuses on media literacy in kids. She helped found a nonprofit that focuses on protecting kids from technology companies and their privacy and those kind of things, which is a really, really big issue in this country right now. The United Kingdom just did a survey a couple months ago, and it was determined that 1 in 4 teenagers in the United Kingdom wake up 10 times during the night to check their social media. So my wife works on those kind of issues. I'm very proud of her. She's been very for our work in disadvantaged communities. But about 10 years ago, my wife and I decided to dedicate the rest of our lives to public service. And that led me to run for Congress. And I was elected in 2012 to represent Maryland's 6th Congressional District in the Congress of the United States, which I proudly represented them for 6 years, for 3 terms. It was a district that had been held by a Republican for 20 years. It's the most competitive district in Maryland. Maryland's a pretty democratic state. I represented the western part of Maryland, which is actually very rural. Some of the most conservative counties actually in the United States of America were in my district. And so again, I've been very blessed. Right, I worked hard, I played by the rules, but I also grew up at a time where we had a society and a set of institutions that helped people in achieving their dreams. But today our young people really don't have those same kind of opportunities. You know, this is the first generation of Americans, right, the young people today, first generation, that won't do better than their parents. First time. First time in our nation's history. You know, if you were born in 1950 in the United States of America, the chances of you earning more than your parents were 90%. 9 out of 10 kids did better than their parents. Fast forward to 1980, it's down to about 50%. Today, they estimate it's about 20%. So in one generation, we've watched the American dream kind of vanish right before our eyes. Why did this happen? People ask. Well, I'll tell you why I think it happened. Because we stopped doing things. We stopped doing the basic things we should have done to update what I call the social compact. You know, that basic deal that our citizens, that we have with each other, about how we support each other. We stopped doing that. And as a result, huge numbers of our kids have been left behind. We're leaving our kids, my kids, your kids, maybe your grandkids, hopefully one day my grandkids, we're leaving them a future they do not deserve. They deserve something so much better. The economic trends of this country, while they may look okay on the surface, with the stock market being up and unemployment being down, and that's great, but we all know behind those numbers is a much different story. Half of our country, literally 50% of our country, according to the Federal Reserve, cannot afford a $500 expense. So if they wake up, something happens to their health or their car or their apartment or house, whatever it is, and it's $500, nothing. They don't have the savings, they don't have the capacity in their credit card. They're living right on the edge. Half of the population. You see what's happened to a lot of towns in this state of yours. Right? People worry about, one of the things I hear when I travel around Iowa, I've been to all 99 counties, by the way. I still think Iowa matters. But when I sit with people in coffee shops and in their living rooms, one of the main questions I get is, will there be jobs here? Because they see what's happening in some of these towns. You know, last year in our country, 80% of the startup capital, you know, the money that goes into new businesses, venture capital, all that stuff, 80% of it went to 50 counties in this country. Think about that. There's 99 counties here in Iowa. There's almost 3,100 counties all around this country. 50 of them, 1.6%, got 80% of the money from new businesses. So in those counties, it's great, right? It's terrific. The public schools are funded really well, because we fund schools with property taxes largely, as we know in this country. It's a real problem, right? The public schools have plenty of money. There's plenty of jobs. Kids in those counties have huge opportunities. I mean, their issue is it's expensive and there's no housing. But for 80% of our kids, they live in a county where the jobs that are getting created are not as good as the jobs that used to exist. Is it a wonder? Is it a surprise that the American dream is fading? This is the future we're leaving our kids. We're leaving them debts they can't repay. Both climate debts, because climate change is in fact a debt. It's an obligation that we leave to the next generation because we don't deal with it. And fiscal debts. If you look at the fiscal condition of this country right now, these are debts that they cannot repay. And we're leaving them a world that is so tremendously divided, where American is increasingly pitted against American. And the President of the United States, I think, wakes up every day and tries to divide us. Literally, I think a president should basically take an oath, in addition to the oath of office. And that oath should be, I swear to do everything in my power to never divide the American people. I think they should wake up every morning and have a little moment to themselves, whether it's prayer or otherwise, where they ask for strength to try to unify this terribly divided country. I worry that our kids are going to face a future where every political disagreement will not be met with the kind of honest, civil, respectful debate that it deserves, but it'll be met with almost violent protest because our disagreements are so ingrained. And we have a president who actually tries to convince us that your enemy is your fellow American because they have a different color in their skin or because they worship a different God. Our enemy is not our fellow American. Our enemy is a political system that does nothing to help you, does nothing to prepare our kids for the future, and has fundamentally failed in its most sacred responsibility to serve the common good. But I think we can have a much better future. I think we can actually start doing things. But I think we can do things to improve the public education in this country so that kids have better opportunities. Last year, according to the military, 70% of high school graduates were not eligible for the military. 7 out of 10. Because of academic, healthcare, or social deficiencies. We have to do better. We have to do better. Climate, which is a huge crisis, we can deal with. We can put a carbon tax in place like I introduced, the only bipartisan carbon tax in the Congress. We can invest massively in innovation and invent the next generation of storage and transmission technologies. And we can actually build machines that take carbon out of the atmosphere because they exist. But they just haven't been invested in, they're not of scale, and they're not economic yet. Right? We can actually start tackling these issues. We can create a universal health care so that everyone has health care as a right. And we can do it in a smart way without throwing out the whole U.S. healthcare system. These are things we can do, but fundamentally we have to come together to do it. Right? We can talk about all the policy, and I'm sure you'll have questions about infrastructure, about automation, artificial intelligence, digital privacy, healthcare, climate, etc. But nothing is more important than restoring a sense of common purpose to this country. Instilling in the American people this notion that we are in this together. And while we may not agree with each other on everything, we don't want to live in a country where we agree with each other on everything. But we deserve to live in a country where our disagreements are debated in a respectful, honest way, and where your political leaders actually every once in a while roll up their sleeves and find common ground and get real things done. And stop turning all these big important issues into talking points, but turn them into action. You know, I wrote a book. One of the things you do when you run for president is you got to write a book. I didn't realize that. But the title of my book is called The Right Answer. And it comes from a speech that John F. Kennedy gave in 1958 before he was president. And the speech was given in Baltimore, Maryland. And there were a couple of beautiful lines in the speech. He said, we should not seek the Republican answer. We should not seek the Democratic answer. We should seek the right answer. Does that make sense? Isn't that common sense? He then said, we shouldn't seek to fix blame for the past. In other words, stop pointing fingers. But what we should do is own our responsibility for the future as Americans. And he gave that speech in 1958, 4 weeks after Sputnik was launched. You know Sputnik, the thing that Soviet Union said. The American people, if you go back, the American people were terrified. They thought they had lost their future. But people like John F. Kennedy and others stepped forward and said, no, our future is ours. We just have to build it together. And we did it. And we did it. I believe we're at the same moment right now. It's not one rocket, it's lots of things. It's tremendous change in the world. Globalization and technological innovation, the most powerful forces in our world right now. They're changing everything. They're changing jobs. They're changing the future of work. They're changing our national security risks. They're changing our privacy. We don't have any, by the way. Right? We have to confront these things. Together as Americans, we have to update the basic social compact so that you and your kids and your grandkids have opportunities. Right? So that 80% of the startup money doesn't go in 50 counties, it goes in 1,500. Where people aren't shackled to their job because of health care, which is what they are now. Where they can do what I did if they want, like start a business. I would never have started my business but for the fact that my wife had health care at her job. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have created thousands of jobs and I wouldn't be standing here in front of you fine folks. These are things we have to do. But we have to be reminded that this notion of common purpose, that we're all in it together, is the beating heart of this country. And it's worth fighting for every single day of our lives. Every day of our lives. Every one of us has to do something, in my opinion, to restore it. And that is why I'm running for president. I want to be the president who looks out the American people when I'm inaugurated and say, I represent every one of you, whether you voted for me or not. And I'm going to prove it to you. One way I'm going to prove it to you is I'm not going to act like half of you are wrong about everything you believe. The other way I'm going to prove it to you is in my first 100 days, these are my 5 or 6 things I'm going to work on. They're going to be big things, but they're going to be based on existing bipartisan legislation in the Congress. So there'll be a climate, an infrastructure, a privacy, a criminal justice bill. Word for word from bipartisan bills in the Congress, and I'll say good-minded Democrats and Republicans have worked together and found common ground on these, so let's do this. And then I'll debate the Congress once a quarter for 3 hours on national television so that you know what the truth is. Because we all know the truth is the truth, but it's become elusive in our political debate. We got to get it back.
Alternative facts.
Right? We got to get it back. The only way to do it is for me and the Congress, the Republicans, to actually have a debate on all these issues. We can do this, but we have to do it together. And if we can do this, if we come together a little bit, and if the Democratic Party steps up and saves the country, because that's what we got to do. We got to win. We got to beat him, and then we got to govern. And the best way to do that is to be a Big Tent party, get all the progressives, moderates, independents, and a bunch of those disaffected Republicans all together. We're all in this together. We're going to beat them, and then we're going to govern. If we do that, we'll beat them, we'll govern, we'll get things done, and we'll rethink our future. So that we look back and say, you know, we turned the page, and we started doing things. That's why I'm running for president. And I'd love your support. But I'm grateful you had me here today, and I'd love to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
And I never hear anyone mention guns and gun control.
So that would be on one of my issues, because there's a bipartisan bill in the Congress on this, universal background check.
So, and that's it.
No, I would want to do more. So I'll tell you what I'd want to do. I'd want to do 3 things. Universal background checks, limitations on certain high-powered weapons, and then I'd want to push these things called red flag laws, which we have in my state of Maryland, which have actually started to work. What that means, a family can go to the court and say one of our family members has a firearm, they have a serious mental illness, and they threaten themselves or someone else. Will you, the court, intervene and take their firearm away? It was used 150 times in my state last year. I got to believe one of them would have been a big shooting. So those are the 3 things I want to do. We do have to address the mental health crisis in this country too. It's staggering in its scale. 40 million Americans are suffering from mental illness. So it's a bit of a false choice. Some people say we got to do gun safety. We're like, yeah, we do. And we got to do more mental health. Yeah, we do. That's how I think about it. Yes, sir.
Yes, Congressman, you talked about climate change a little bit. I'm a farmer.
Yep.
And last November, the government issued this 4th National Climate Assessment, which predicted dire results for agriculture.
Yep.
In fact, here in Iowa, it talks about the yield of corn being reduced by perhaps 75% of what it is now. Soybean yields could be 30% lower.
Yep.
This is going to have a drastic effect on Iowa's economy. And what specifically do you intend to do about that?
Okay. So I got a very specific plan. I think it's a huge issue. It's been a big priority to me while I was in the Congress. I was voted the Citizens Climate Lobby Legislator of the Year award for the work I did. This is a huge priority for me. And I think it's very different than our other problems. We got a lot of other issues we got to deal with. This is the one where we're running out of time. So what matters is doing something and doing something right away. Because we can't wait 5 years. We've already waited too long. So let me tell you the 3 things I would do to get us to net zero by 2050, which has to be our goal. That will keep us below 2 degrees Celsius in warming. And that's kind of the point of no return. And it'll also position us to fix the problem globally. Because one of the problems is China and India are opening up a coal plant a week. Right? So this is also a global issue. So let me tell you exactly what I would do. In my first year as president, I will pass a bipartisan carbon tax bill. I introduced a bipartisan carbon tax bill in the Congress. That's right, Democrats and Republicans came together with my leadership, and we introduced a bill that puts a price on carbon. It is modeled to reduce emissions by 90% by 2050. It puts a price on carbon, 100% of the revenues get collected and get given right back to the American people in a dividend. And the American people can take the dividend in cash, or it can go in a retirement, education, or health savings account. So it goes out one pocket and in the other. And the dividend is in a progressive way because the tax is kind of progressive. That's the way carbon taxes are. So what that does is puts the brakes on climate change. Doesn't solve the problem, but it slows it down. Second thing I want to do is I'm going to increase the Department of Energy research budget from $6 billion to $30. Five-fold moonshot type increase in the research. And the reason that's important is we need new innovation in battery, storage, and transmission technologies to ever get ourselves to true net zero. And I believe the American way, which is innovation, intellectual capital, basic research, can put us in a position to solve this problem. It's the second thing I do. Third thing I would do is create a market for what I call our negative emissions technologies, which are things that exist. No one talks about them. They're a big part of my campaign. These are machines and methods. So let's focus on the machines, because there are methods. In some ways, using land is a method, right? But they're machines that exist that suck carbon out of the atmosphere. The way they do it is they suck the air across basically filters. The carbon attaches to certain materials and minerals. It then gets heated up. Carbon gets liquefied and pumped back in the earth. They're expensive. They cost $600 a metric ton to take carbon out of the atmosphere. Today, people think the cost of carbon is anywhere from $50 to $80 a ton. So the problem with these machines, even though they work, is they're really expensive and they're not of scale. But to me, that's a problem that we can solve. Because remember, wind and solar used to be really expensive and not of scale. But what did we do? We created a market for them. And the private economy did what it does best, which is it innovated like crazy, and it brought the price way down, and now you see them everywhere. I want to take the $5 billion a year that we provide to fossil fuel companies in tax credits. I want to take that, and I want to use it to create a market for these technologies. Meaning I want to create a market where the government buys carbon at prices that go down every year to encourage massive investments in these technologies so that these machines get to scale. I think we need these machines to get the last 20% of the carbon out of our atmosphere. Meaning the whole private economy, with my carbon tax in place and with renewable credits, over the next 20 or 30 years, will move from largely fossil fuel based to renewables. But it's not going to get all the carbon out because we have airplanes, we have other stuff. We're going to need these machines. And the other things that are it's great about doing what I'm saying is we will invest and own the most valuable technology in the world if we do this. And we can provide it to countries all over the world. So I think the way we got to deal with climate is 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels right now. And there is no way of replacing all that energy in as short a time as we need to. So what we have to do is, while we move to renewables, we have to move faster to actually decarbonizing fossil fuels. So that's my very specific climate plan. I believe I can get it done. I believe it's very consistent with the great strength of this country, which is we invent stuff and solve problems. And we have to start thinking about this problem in that way as much as we think about it in terms of transitioning to renewables. Like, you have to do both if you really want to solve the problem.